$5.25 billion. That is the amount of debt sitting on the company behind some of the most famous roller coasters in America. For decades, Six Flags was not just a theme park chain. It was the summer vacation of the American middle class. Millions of families packed into minivans, drove a few hours down the highway, and spent their weekends chasing roller coasters instead of flying to Disney World. But then something changed. These parks stopped being viewed as places for families. They started being viewed as financial assets. The land became more valuable than the memories built on top of it. Debt became more important than the experience itself. And the places once filled with laughter slowly turned into liquidation opportunities on corporate balance sheets. This is not just the downfall of Six Flags. This is the story of how America turned its own childhood into a financial asset. $5.25 billion in debt. That is where this story really begins. Not with roller coasters, not with children, not with entertainment, with debt. For decades, Six Flags was the middle-class version of Disneyland, a massive network of regional theme parks spread across America. Families could load up the car, drive a few hours down the interstate, buy a season pass, and create an entire summer of memories without spending thousands of dollars on flights and hotels in Florida. It was simple, affordable, predictable, and for a long time, it worked incredibly well. Six Flags became part of the rhythm of American suburban life. The same highway exits, the same parking lots, the same rides every summer. For millions of families, these parks were not luxury destinations. They were traditions. One of the few forms of entertainment still built for ordinary middle-class Americans. And that made the business look almost unstoppable. Stable attendance, reliable cash flow, huge amounts of land near growing cities. But that stability attracted a different kind of attention. Wall Street looked at Six Flags and did not see roller coasters. It saw assets, it saw expansion opportunities, it saw leverage. And once debt entered the system, the entire business started changing. The parks stopped being places designed to create memories. They slowly became numbers on balance sheets. And that shift would eventually push one of America's most recognizable entertainment brands to the edge of collapse.
When Six Flags Over Texas opened in 1961, the idea was almost perfect for the moment America was entering. The country was exploding with suburban growth. New highways stretched across the nation. Millions of families were buying cars for the first time. And suddenly, Americans could travel farther than ever before without boarding a plane. Disneyland already existed, but for most middle-class families, California was too far away and too expensive. Six Flags solved that problem. It brought the theme park experience closer to home. This was not destination tourism. It was drive-to entertainment. Parents could pack the kids into a station wagon on Saturday morning, drive a few hours down the interstate, and spend the entire day inside a world built around escape, excitement, and spectacle. No expensive resorts. No week-long vacations. No flights. Just one affordable summer tradition repeated over and over again. And the model worked incredibly well. Six Flags expanded into major population centers across America and built a loyal regional audience that returned every season. The parks became deeply connected to suburban life itself. They were not competing with Disney. They were serving a completely different America. An America built around highways, shopping malls, growing suburbs, and middle-class spending power. For decades, that system looked almost impossible to break. But by the late 1990s, the company no longer wanted to remain a regional theme park operator. Six Flags wanted something much bigger. It wanted scale. It wanted national dominance. It wanted to become an empire.
After Premier Parks acquired the Six Flags brand, the company entered a buying frenzy that completely changed its future. Between 1998 and 2001, Six Flags acquired 31 parks in roughly 4 years. On paper, the strategy looked brilliant. More parks meant more visitors. More visitors meant more sponsorship deals, more advertising power, and a larger national footprint. The company believed scale would turn Six Flags into a true entertainment empire capable of competing with the biggest brands in America. But the reality underneath the expansion looked very different. Many of the parks being acquired were already weak properties with aging infrastructure and inconsistent attendance. And theme parks are not cheap businesses to maintain. Roller coasters require constant inspections. Electrical systems cannot be ignored forever. Water rides break down, steel rusts, safety regulations become more expensive every year. Unlike other businesses, a theme park cannot simply stop investing and hope customers will not notice. The rides have to work, the park has to feel clean, the experience has to feel safe. But as the company kept expanding, debt started growing faster than revenue. The parks were no longer generating enough cash to support the system being built around them. Instead of creating operational strength, the acquisitions created a massive maintenance burden spread across dozens of properties. And then the first major shock hit, September 11th. Travel and tourism attendance dropped across the country almost overnight. Families cut back spending. Consumer confidence collapsed. And Six Flags entered the crisis carrying enormous debt at the exact moment the business became most vulnerable.
By 2003, the numbers were becoming impossible to ignore. Six Flags lost $122 million in just the first half of the year. Debt climbed to roughly $2.4 billion. That level of debt was extremely dangerous for a business built around conditions nobody could fully control. Theme parks depend on good weather. They depend on families feeling financially secure enough to spend money on entertainment. They depend on strong seasonal traffic during a limited part of the year. A few bad months can damage an entire season. A weak economy can destroy attendance almost overnight. And unlike technology companies or digital businesses, theme parks still carry massive physical costs even when fewer people walk through the gates. The rides still need maintenance. The staff still needs to be paid. The insurance bills still arrive. But the company kept borrowing anyway. And by 2009, the system finally cracked. Six Flags filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, carrying around $2.7 billion in debt. Yet, what made the collapse so strange was how invisible it looked from the outside. Customers did not see empty parks overnight. The roller coasters still operated. Families still bought funnel cakes. Summer still happened. From inside the parks, everything looked normal. That is often how corporate decline works in America. Systems can keep functioning long after the financial structure underneath them has already started collapsing. The lights stay on. The music keeps playing. The illusion survives longer than the balance sheet. But in Houston, Texas, people were about to see what happens when financial logic finally overrides nostalgia, community, and decades of memories all at once.
AstroWorld was not a failed park. That is what made the entire situation feel so shocking to people in Houston. The park still had visitors. Families still showed up every summer. The rides still mattered to the city. For generations of Texans, AstroWorld was part of childhood itself. It was where birthdays happened, where teenagers spent summer nights, where parents returned years later with their own children. The park was deeply tied to the identity of Houston. But by the early 2000s, something more powerful than nostalgia started taking over the equation. The land underneath the park became more valuable than the park itself. And once that happens, the logic changes completely. In rapidly growing American cities, land becomes an asset first and a community space second. Everything built on top of it starts looking temporary, even memories. Six Flags executives looked at AstroWorld and no longer saw a functioning theme park with loyal customers. They saw 104 acres of increasingly valuable urban real estate that could help reduce debt. In 2005, the company closed the park and sold the land for $77 million. The roller coasters were dismantled. The rides were auctioned off across the country. Buildings were demolished. Decades of memories disappeared piece by piece. And the most brutal part of the entire story came afterward. Almost nothing meaningful was ever built on the site. The land that replaced one of Texas's most beloved parks became little more than overflow parking near the stadium complex. A place once filled with noise, lights, and families slowly turned into empty pavement. And for many people in Houston, that parking lot became proof that financial logic does not always create something better. But at this point, this is no longer just a story about Six Flags. It is a story about financialized America, a system where almost everything eventually becomes an asset to be traded, leveraged, projected, or liquidated. Shopping malls became investment vehicles. Housing became speculative inventory. Hospitals became revenue systems. Even sports teams transformed into financial instruments owned by billionaires and private equity firms. And theme parks slowly entered the same machine. Six Flags stopped making money only from rides and ticket sales. It started chasing growth narratives that looked good to investors. That shift became most visible in China. The company announced massive international expansion plans and began projecting future revenue from parks that did not even exist yet. Analysts built growth models around attendance numbers for roller coasters that had never been constructed. Investors priced future success into the stock long before families ever walked through the gates. At that point, the business was no longer selling experiences. It was selling expectations. It was selling a story about endless growth, a narrative powerful enough to push stock valuations higher without the parks themselves generating real cash flow. And for a while, the system appeared to work. Then COVID arrived, the parks closed, attendance vanished, the projections collapsed. And suddenly, the difference between real businesses and financial narratives became impossible to hide. Roller coasters cannot generate revenue when nobody is allowed to ride them. Debt payments do not stop because a park is empty. The illusion disappeared almost overnight, and once the narrative collapsed, the entire system underneath it started shaking again. In 2024, Six Flags merged with Cedar Fair, its largest competitor in North America. The name survived, but the original company that began in Texas back in 1961 was effectively gone. The brand remained recognizable, the parks still operated, families still walked through the gates. But the financial structure underneath the company had completely changed, and the debt never really disappeared. Even after bankruptcies, restructurings, and mergers, the combined company still carried billions of dollars in long-term debt while continuing to close parks across the country. That raises a much bigger question than what happened to one theme park chain. Because if even places built around family memories can eventually become financial assets, then what in America is still being built primarily for people instead of investors? When land becomes more valuable than community and debt becomes more important than experience, the first thing that disappears is usually not the corporation itself. It is the places that gave cities their identity. The places people grew up around, the places that made ordinary life feel exciting for a few hours every summer. Across America, families are still driving past abandoned lots where roller coasters once stood. Workers who spent decades operating rides are gone. Childhood landmarks disappeared quietly behind corporate press releases and portfolio reviews. And in many cases, nothing meaningful ever replaced them, because the system was never really designed to protect memories. It was designed to protect value. And once memories become assets, they can always be sold. Because when money moves, power follows. And when financial logic replaces human value, entire pieces of American life can disappear without anyone stopping the machine.